I started with a blank slate to focus more on projects that aimed to solve societal problems. So far, 21 companies that I've exited. Well, I try to keep close where ideas are, and I usually say that the cure for cancer is not in the mind of someone my age. The great new ideas, most of the times, are in the heads of young people, of younger people at least. Since I started doing it, I started having my computer attacked by Chinese IP addresses. So I went to New York with the old backpack, sleeping in a crappy bedroom in Upper West Side, and it was, I have to say, probably one of the most rewarding experiences professionally of my life. There's a huge problem, which is the founders and co-founders often don't have the skill sets that are necessary to make a running company successful.
Today I interviewed David Carvalhão, a Portuguese tech expert and the co-founder of more than 20 companies here. He has 20 years of experience in business ecosystem in Portugal. He had 21 exits. So we've discussed different support programs for VC funds, for accelerators, incubators, and for startups.
Max Pog builds a startup studio.
Hi David, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Today we'll talk about startup and VC fund ecosystem in Portugal. And I hope to call this video 2023 is a window of opportunities for VC funds and startups in Portugal.
It is so.
But let's start with your experience. I know that you have a broad experience in tech industries, from being an employee to a co-founder and inventor. So can you share your career path?
Of course. So I graduated from Aveiro University, which, well, I like to say it's the best university in the country. Probably it's not, but I like to say so. I graduated electronics and telecommunications back in 2003. Then I went on to work at Siemens. It was my first job. And from there to my first startup, I had 4 jobs in which I was always transitioning and climbing, let's say, the corporate ladder. But my average stay in a job would be like 9 months. So what I usually felt is whenever I felt that the learning curve was starting to flatten, I would either request that I would be reassigned somewhere else inside the company, or I would just leave and look for something else. And that has led me in 2006 to create my first company. At the time, it was a consulting company called Edge Consulting, which was my first project. That one went pretty well. So next year, I created another one, also consulting, but focused on open source. That also went pretty well. And I started creating a group of companies. So I got to 2012. I had a group with 16 companies under it, because in the meantime, I had 16.
16?
Yeah, because in the meantime, I had created a research and development area within this group, and we were...
Is it called eGen Ventures?
eGen Ventures, exactly. And basically we were hunting for new technologies, new ideas that we would then bring in-house. We would do the research and development in-house and then spin them off as their own companies. I left that group in 2015, December 2015, and I started with a blank slate. Because, well, for various reasons, but one of the main ones, I wanted to focus more on projects that aimed to solve societal problems. I wouldn't say impact investments in the common sense of, double bottom line type of thing, but definitely businesses and technologies that had a positive impact in the large societal problems, let's say, that the world had. I've also veered off topic to other things. So currently I'm not only involved in startups, but I also started being involved in venture capital. Initially as an evaluator and assessor, which I still do, not only for some private equity funds, but also for the EIT of the European Commission. But also into other ventures, more social ones. So I started dedicating about 25 to 30% of my time to social ventures or social projects, and that's how I split my time. So about 1/4 my own companies, 1/4 venture capital, 1/4 to these social ventures, social work, and the remaining creating new technologies and patents, of which right now I hold 5 patents as a co-inventor, and now I'm finishing, hopefully, developing my next one.
Am I right that this eGen Ventures was like a startup accelerator, or it was a VC fund?
No, it became so. At the end of the day, what happened was we had companies that were cash cows. They were not particularly innovative. These were consulting companies, but they were generating a lot of cash. And we saw an opportunity space. At the time, we were talking 2008, 2009. We saw that there was an opportunity space that was starting to be created in this new arena of the startups and of innovation. So given that I've always had considerable interest in this area of creating new stuff and dabbling with new technologies, we started redirecting part of this capital into investing into most of the times new ideas. So we would often pick up people that had good structured ideas. They most of the time didn't even have, I don't know, the aspiration of creating a startup or anything like that. We would bring them in, bring the technology, develop it in-house, spin off the startup. These people would get a share in this startup, and we had like a conveyor belt. We were just feeding it on one side, developing and churning out startups on the other side.
And you had shares in these companies?
Yes. So the group was always a majority shareholder in these companies, and I really can't call them co-founders because, again, most of the times what these people brought was just an idea initially. So it wasn't that they were very involved in the startup from a creation perspective or development perspective, but they brought the idea. We would give them always an interesting share so that they would feel that their idea, their initial concept was still theirs, and they would still participate mainly on the technical part.
What is your portfolio now? So you've been participating and involved in different startups. So your main project now is IH Care.
Yes,
and
exactly.
what other companies you have shares in?
Okay, so right now my main focus again have been companies that have a social impact of some way or form. So my main focus is IH Care, which is developing products for hospitals and for hospital care in general, but focused on bedridden patients. So we've developed several technologies to avoid cross-infections and hospital infections in bedridden patients specifically, that we are now rolling out to market. I have a share in CO2 Offset, which is a company that is generating carbon credits based on satellite analysis of forest imagery to determine what is the actual carbon capture associated with forest, which is then used to reward, let's say, the forest owners and the forest carers so that they have an incentive to keep their forests in good shape, and they get paid for the carbon credits they generate. I also have a small stake in Circular Unity. That's a company that makes an assessment not only of the carbon production, let's say the carbon emissions associated with events, large events like Rock in Rio, football matches, and then allows the organizers to offset these carbon emissions. I also have a small stake, again, in the VC fund, called, not VC fund, more correctly, it's a venture builder called Union of Venture Builders. So currently this is pretty much my portfolio. Oh, I also have a small share in another thing, but this was mostly a back thing, which is a company that has an app for you to manage your pets, because I love pets. Called Petable.
So your main focus is IH Care.
Yes.
And you also are evaluating and scouting for startups.
Yes.
For VC funds. So with which funds are you partnering when you give them this deal flow?
I'm sorry, but most of the times that information is not something I cannot divulge. I can tell you the ones I can tell you about. Have passed some startups to Insight Ventures, to Kick Inno Energy, which is part of the IT Inno Energy Fund, and the other ones I'm sorry I can't talk about.
How do you create a deal flow? So when you find new aspiring entrepreneurs with ideas?
Well, I try to keep close where ideas are, and ideas. I usually say that the cure for cancer is not in the mind of someone my age. I'm not that young anymore. The great new ideas, most of the times, are in the heads of young people, of younger people at least. Although often they don't have perhaps the necessary tools to bring them to full fruition. That's why the average successful entrepreneur is in their 40s, although most of the startups are created by someone in their 20s. But I try to hang around universities, research labs, people that are bringing new ideas and that are in these contexts that are exciting and full of energy. I also travel a lot around, not only around Portugal, but abroad to attend either startup events, usually as a mentor, or conferences on this topic as a speaker. And usually this affords me a great deal of interaction with people with ideas. Fortunately, I'm at a point that most of the times I get contacted through LinkedIn because someone knows someone that said, hey, if you have a startup, you have to talk to David. And I just pick it up from there.
So you mentioned that you had some experience with US startups or ecosystem. So could you tell more about it?
Okay, so this was in 2013 or 14. Well, it was a while ago. I went to New York to create my first company there. At the time, we were developing a novel app that eventually was sold. So I went to New York with the old backpack, sleeping in a crappy bedroom in Upper West Side, and it was, I have to say, probably one of the most rewarding experiences professionally of my life, because well, New York and San Francisco are places which you really feel the vibe of the startups. Getting funding, it's a lot easier in terms of private funding, a lot easier than it is in Europe in general. I really enjoyed that. Although the American market is, on one hand, it's easier to break in terms of scaling fast because language is the same. And although the states do diverge a bit in legislation, but on average, it's quite standardized, and you can really jump from one state to the other when you're selling. Also, let's face it, fiscally, there are some states that are very interesting, but it does have some challenges. It's not completely as clear cut as I thought initially. But yeah, it was a good experience. I ended up also exiting that company, and things went well, and I was happy there. I do advise anyone that is in the startup arena, let's say, to at least go to Austin, Texas, or to New York, or to San Francisco, and just mingle a bit around, understand what's the dynamics there, because there's really some takeaways you can bring back to Europe.
Have you counted the number of startups you exited? Because you mentioned already several of them. And so you said that your strategy is to start the company, to make it start to grow and then sell it, not being much involved in this company. So can you share your personal strategy?
Sure. It's so the valley of death graph, the usual startup life cycle. After you go through the valley of death, that's where you have your scale-up period, and that's where the slope of growth is the largest. I usually try to exit there, get some cash that I'll invest in the next venture, and keep a small position in the company. For me, that's my sweet spot. So that hedges the risk against the company eventually not scaling fast enough or not being able to acquire enough market share and not being viable in the future. I already got some cash out. And in the eventuality that it will become like a unicorn or something really big, I still have a small stake there. It will still pay for my breakfast.
So how many companies you exited?
So far 21 companies that I've exited.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what is average like money you get when you sell your company? What is on this stage?
That's another thing that I will not say for because I've exited in several jurisdictions, let's say, and it's something I'd rather not say.
Okay. So you mentioned Union Venture Builders.
Yes.
Can you tell about its strategy and business model? So how it works?
Of course. So, Union Venture Builders appeared as a response for a problem that the founders and I were feeling in the market as mentors, as co-founders, as investors. You have a huge failure rate in startups. There is a part of that failure rate which is understandable and easy to explain when you consider that you're pushing the envelope and the state of the art of some technologies and often also of the market, of what the market is expecting. And it often happens that the market is just not ready for innovation. You may even have something amazing that will really be something in 10 years, but the market is just not ready now. The thing is, that is part of the problem, but then there's a huge problem, which is the founders and co-founders often don't have the skill sets that are necessary to make a running company successful. These are management skills, these are financial skills, these are a whole plethora of things that they're really not qualified to do, and often they even resist a bit handing over these aspects of running their companies to someone else. So, having identified this, what we tried to build was something that would make sure that we would be bringing in these skills into the company, but more importantly, that we would keep these skills. Because on the other hand, we also saw a problem with most acceleration programs. I usually try to compare this to getting someone new into a Formula One car. And you as an accelerator, you are there, pressing the gas, and you're getting that car up to 300 kilometers per hour. And then when the acceleration program ends, you just go away, and now the guy is driving a car 300 kilometers per hour, and there's the first turn. And they don't know what to do when they crash. And this was a problem we found in the way most acceleration programs are time limited. So you get through that experience, and at the end of it, you may have some skills, you may be moving fast, but you really don't have the skills to keep that going in a safe way for your company. So we tried to address that by not only bringing highly skilled mentors that would help the companies while we were preparing them to be investable, but also by making sure that these mentors would get a small stake that would keep them involved. You could consider something as board advisors, let's say, that would keep them involved with the company afterwards, throughout the entire life cycle of the company. And this has really been working out because we've been able to get highly qualified people. These are people that are highly motivated as well because they feel that they're getting a share of the company they're mentoring. It's not a one-time thing that they just do and move on to the next one. They get involved in the management, they're advising all the way through, they are providing introductions, they're bringing in other highly qualified people into the company, and this has really been working out. And we have the trust and the confidence of several investment funds that pretty much, I wouldn't say exclusively invest in the startups that go through our program, but clearly we're given preference because they know that they're getting something that has been structured, has the necessary skill sets, and the probability of failure is much lower.
So you invite mentors, you have a network of mentors, and you join them to these startups.
Yes.
What percentage of company did mentors get, and Union Venture Builders?
Okay, so Union Venture Builders typically gets 5% of equity plus 3% equity tops on top, which will be distributed at 0.5% per mentor. So if we have 6 mentors, which is the maximum that we consider, there will be 3% additionally that will be distributed through these mentors. Typically, our experience is that usually 2-3 mentors is enough to plug the main shortfalls of the company. So I would say that in reality, the company will be giving about 6.5%. And in return, they get not only the participation of these mentors, but we structure the entire project. Often in this process, the company even pivots or need to really adjust their business model. We really structure it so it becomes what we call investment grade company. Something that an investor can go there, they're sure that the financials make sense, they're sure the business model makes sense. It's not one of those, our valuation is 2 million because I just say so. No, we do a proper due diligence, we prepare the company, we create the structure, the management structure behind it, and then we put it in front of the investor.
Can you share some examples of these univenture builders startups?
Sure, of course. So other than two of the companies that I already refer, which are Circular Unity and CO2 Offset, you have, for instance, Famel, which is a company that is developing electrical motorbikes. It's a household name in Portugal for motorbikes. So almost all Portuguese will remember the old gas-powered Famel, and now they're launching this novel concept. There are three more companies that now are about to get invested, but again, those are, I have some confidentiality agreements that don't allow me to talk about those.
Can you tell me about how you are evaluating technologies coming from labs to real world, and what is your job? And I know that you are a tech expert, you have some patents.
Yeah,
so
sure. So most of the work that I develop here has two major lines. One of them is my work with the IT of the European Commission, where I'm an evaluator of disruptive technologies. And so basically I get sent technologies that have the potential of disrupting the market or the technology space to evaluate their potential to effect that change in the market or in the technology. Which has been an interesting experience, especially because since I started doing it, I started having my computer attacked by Chinese IP addresses, which is interesting.
they want to steal your technologies.
Well, I think they probably want to steal everyone's technologies. But, and on the other hand, I also work closely with some universities where I try to bring technologies that they're developing there into creating viable spin-offs that can explore those technologies in the market. So what we would say like TRL 5 to TRL 9 in terms of the technology readiness level indicator. You don't need nowadays to hire an entry-level copywriter to write your post. You go to ChatGPT, you put there what you want to say, and you get pretty good results with hashtags and everything. So I do predict that people who can now invest in acquiring these skills and becoming extremely proficient at using these tools are just going to blow everyone else out of the water. Our identity is so much connected to what we do, and we won't have this connection, I would say, in the future for large parts of the population.
I want to ask you, I saw a lot of posts about AI on your LinkedIn, and probably you, like many entrepreneurs and investors, fell in love with AI tools and technologies. So what do you expect from AI, how our lives will be changed and our work and businesses?
Well, that's a topic that I've been addressing throughout Europe since 2015. I think that there will be a major impact, the same way that the Industrial Revolution impacted the repetitive labor industries, and later the informatics revolution revolutionized the office productivity. I think that we're going to see more and more this affecting first things like driving, as we see, not only of cars, but flying planes, boats, and so forth. But also we are going to be seeing, and we're witnessing that now, that even higher echelons of human activity, such as engineering, creative arts, are now already, I would say, under attack by these tools. What I believe is going to happen is not necessarily that people are going to be replaced by these tools, but they will for sure be replaced by the people that know how to use these tools. And these people will be a lot less than the ones you have now in the market. This, of course, will create a huge barrier of entry for new entrants, such as trainees or people that are now leaving universities. Why should you hire a trainee programmer if you have a tool that can produce, simple code for you? But I think we're going to be witnessing a real revolution in the way the job market and labor market is organized.
So I want you to continue the topic of how our lives will be changed and how maybe less people can get job because the standard for getting job will be higher than now.
Yes, of course. So as I was saying, once you have tools that cover, I would say, the entry level work, then it becomes a lot harder for people who just left college and are only qualified to address that type of work to get a job because they're being replaced by machines. And if they can't get a job, they cannot get experience and they will never overcome this stage. So it's like a barrier, it's like a wall that sits between them and the experience they need to access the job market. Also, what we're going to be seeing, and we already see it now, is that there are certain functions, I would say like copywriter for social media posts. There you can really see that for the entry level, the technology is already there. You don't need nowadays to hire an entry level copywriter to write your posts. You go to ChatGPT, you put there what you want to say, and you get pretty good results with hashtags and everything. So these jobs are going to go away, I have absolutely no doubt. And I think that one of the big consequences of this is that you are going to see reduced job mobility and social mobility as well. So it's going to be a lot harder for someone through their work to leave the status where they are now from a financial perspective and reach a higher level.
I know that there are a lot of online courses now that teach how to use AI tools in work, in marketing, because yes, like you said, that SMM specialists will be not necessary when ChatGPT is working.
Yeah, but even other areas. If you look, for instance, to the DALL-E and other similar tools that you have in the market, you can now generate art. You can now generate logos. You can generate UI UX interfaces that you may argue they're not perfect. But if you remove that 80 to 90% of the work, someone else was doing this work today, and they won't be doing it in the future. So now what you need is someone who's highly qualified, who can ask a tool to do all of this entry-level work, which would be done by trainees or more inexperienced workers, and then they'll just pick it up, just for the final fine-tuning. And again, the people that know how to use these tools correctly, how to squeeze out of them what is needed, are the ones who are going to be getting the positions. They're going to be getting highly paid because there's going to be fewer of them, and they're going to be a lot more productive. But what about everyone else? So I do predict that people who can now invest in acquiring these skills and becoming extremely proficient at using these tools are just going to blow everyone else out of the water.
So knowing AI tools is very necessary skill.
I think it's beyond necessary. I think it is essential if you want to remain half relevant, let's say.
It's like smartphone or laptop.
Exactly. Or I would compare it more to internet. It's like nowadays not being able to use the internet. You don't know how to do it, you're out.
And what will be with all people that are losing jobs? So what do you think will be in society?
Well, the good part and the good news about all this is that as more automation comes online, there is going to be a tendency for the costs of goods and services to tend towards the cost of energy. So in terms of material wealth, society will continue to improve and living conditions will continue to increase. The thing is, there is going to be very hard for someone who is a have-not or who is in the lower echelons of society to have the social mobility to reach higher levels of the societal structure, let's say, because they will not be able to do it through work. That is going to be removed from most people's possibilities, which will also mean that if these people cannot have any way of sustenance whatsoever, the state will have to come in. And I think we're going to have a very hard transition period because no society survives above 30% unemployment, at least in current conditions. You can see that in Venezuela. Even though it's a very repressive state, you reach 30%, the state collapses, and the country effectively collapsed. Even so, you will be having a transition period in which it will not be clear. If you have 20% unemployment, there is still going to be the temptation of some people in society to say, those people don't want to work. I don't want to pay for their universal basic income or for whatever is coming next. Once you reach 30%, it's going to be a necessity. You will have to pay enough for these people to live decent lives. Although we might question if they're going to be meaningful lives when we live in a world where the job is so tied up to your identity. As we were mentioning earlier, second question you ask someone you meet is what you do, what's your name, what you do. Our identity is so much connected to what we do, and we won't have this connection, I would say, in the future for large parts of the population.
So what people will answer to the questions, what are you doing?
Well, one thing I can tell you for sure, the entertainment industry is really going to get a kick out of it. You are going to see content creation, gaming, all types of leisure experiences, all types of leisure activities on the rise. I have no doubt you're going to have more and more leisure time. Some people, that's everything they're going to have. And probably some people are going to be limited to talking about the series that they're watching or what was the new game they tried yesterday. When someone asks me, should I create my startup in Portugal? If your startup is R&D heavy and if the outcome has positive social impact, definitely yes. Living in Portugal is nice. I don't think I need to tell you that. So you can have a decent, not only decent lifestyle, but also access to the European market with a certain ease, while having all of the advantages of living here. You're not going to become rich in Portugal, but it's a great test market.
I want to ask you about VC fund ecosystem in Portugal. For example, if some people want to structure a new fund here in Portugal, or maybe an accelerator or incubator here, or a startup studio, so they have to understand what is here now. So can you tell, how can you describe this VC ecosystem in Portugal?
First of all, perhaps a bit of history and context. The VC industry in Portugal is relatively recent, and that really showed up until, I would say, 2012, 2013. It was quite immature. Then you had some players more experienced trends abroad in other VCs that started coming in, and right now in terms of maturity, I would say that we have extremely mature and competent and knowledgeable VC fund managers, and that has really been shown in the maturity of how the entire processes are structured. So I would say that right now Portugal is on par with, at least with the rest of Europe, if not also with the United States. In terms of how do you create this in Portugal? If you want to create a regulated VC fund, the first step is you contact CMVM, which is our regulator, and you check the current law, because that changes frequently. So you need to keep track of whatever's happening now. What I tell you today is not necessarily what's going to be true next week. And you interact with CMVM. It is very important to have this interaction early on, not to prepare your entire thing and then just show up with all the work done. It's important to involve them in this process, and of course involve a proper lawyer's office to support you in this process. Another alternative, if you want to create SQ investment fund, is to create what is called a vehicle entity, entidade veículo, which is nothing more than a limited liability company or an anonymous society, a sociedade anónima, which then invests in this company. And, well, whoever wants to invest this has to buy a share in this company that owns the other companies, what you call a vehicle entity. In both situations, you can apply to different programs, but that exist for both instances, for co-investment, for vouchers to support the creation of your fund. Then there's a plethora of supports there, most of which you can find either in an online portal called Portal dos Incentivos. Perhaps then you can provide this in the show notes, or with the PRR program. Although the PRR is more focused in incubators, accelerators, and so forth. So what can you expect in Portugal in terms of support? Basically, two things. One, co-investment. For both situations, there are co-investment programs that allow you to not only leverage your investment, but also hedge your risk. Most of these, what they allow you to do is they will co-invest with you and allow the investor to purchase back the equity that was purchased by the co-investor at very, very interesting conditions later in the future. So it hedges your risk. If the business goes well, you buy it at a discount. If it goes wrong, you don't owe anyone anything. So it's a very interesting incentive for you to manage risk, let's say. Another situation that you can encounter is in terms of tax breaks and other ways, let's say, to lower your operation costs in Portugal due to the fact that you are investing in certain areas of the economy. Especially nowadays, if you're investing in social impact, green economy, ocean economy, within this realm, let's say, of environmentally friendly social impact companies, you have a number of funds that provide you both. So they both co-invest and they provide you with fiscal benefits. The most relevant of which recently is called the CFID fund, with which were created a number of funds that are currently operating in Portugal with very, very interesting conditions. Fundamentally, I wouldn't say they eliminate, but they really reduce the risk associated with investments and make it very interesting to invest in Portugal through the use of these funds.
I heard that like now it is 3-4 active VC funds in Portugal that are investing money, but like due to these programs of co-funding, there'll be 15 to 20 active funds, and that all VC ecosystem they were waiting when these programs will work.
Yes.
So
that has already been happening. You already late 2022, and nowadays you will find that the market has had a significant influx of new funds that were created by existing fund managing entities, but new funds that were created under this umbrella, let's say, of these CFID funds. And currently there's a significant amount of money in the market. The only caveat with these CFID funds, other than the industries, is that you need to show that the majority of your investment will be in research and development of novel technologies or market approaches with your startup. So you cannot pick up a startup that, although is social impact, but is not conducting intensive research and development activities.
do you know, and can you name these programs, for example? I heard that there is a Banco Portuguese do Fomento,
Yes.
and they were creating like
The Social Innovation Fund.
and maybe also a venture capital program, and they are collecting like until 14th February, just 2 days from today. They're collecting applications from future VC funds or new VC funds, and I heard that there was excitement about this because they had 800 applications for their webinar, and like now many investors say, oh, we have to get participate in this program. So what programs do you know?
Well, Banco Português do Fomento right now is conducting investment through this concept called the Social Innovation Fund, the FISH. Again, they co-invest. What happens is you invest as an investor, and then the investor, not the startup, the investor applies for co-investment from this fund, once the investment has been performed. Once it is approved, it has some requirements, namely you need a certification from the National Innovation Agency that certifies that the activity that you're conducting with your company is in fact innovative, that you are doing research and development within what is the norm considered research and development. And once you have the startup has this certification, the investor can then apply for this co-investment, which allows you to again repurchase equity back. They will invest a multiple of your initial investment, and then based on whatever the outcome is, then they will allow the investor to repurchase this at a future time.
So it is one program. The program about what I mentioned was they are co-founding up to 70% of new funds created in Portugal and probably even in the European Union, but aimed to give money to Portuguese startups.
Yes.
And
you need to be incorporated in Portugal for sure. And by the way, if you're going to incorporate in Portugal, you should avoid incorporating in the regions of Porto and Lisbon if you are conducting R&D intensive tasks.
It is for what programs? For all programs or for a specific one?
I would say that if your company is R&D intensive, you will not want to incorporate in Lisbon and Porto, because not only these funds, but the grants that you have to support research and development on top of this. So these are grants that are assigned to the startup, not as part of the investment process, to support the R&D effort. Those are mostly focused on what are considered lower development regions of Portugal, which pretty much exclude Lisbon and Porto. So you do have, as a founder, a lot of advantages of incorporating and operating your startup outside Porto and Lisbon to access these grants.
Can you try to name all these different support programs?
You have CFID, which is one, I would say the major, I'll just go through the major ones because they're probably, CFID is the major co-investment program that you have at the moment, again focused on R&D activities. If you have a social impact and you do R&D, then you can leverage your investment as well using the Social Innovation Fund. And as a startup, if you are conducting research and development activities, you have what is called the IDT programs under the Portugal 2030 larger group of programs, which can then fund you up to 30%, 70% of your R&D activities. Free money.
And also, there are vouchers for startups and for startup accelerators and incubators.
Yes. Again, those you can find on Portal dos Incentivos. So you do have a voucher that can go up to 30 or 35K. Now
30K.
30K. That will support a number of activities, not all activities, but a number of activities, again, if they are related to the development of a new product or service, especially if it has an innovative component, then you can apply to this program. They will fund, again, up to 70% of your activities. If you're creating an incubator, there is also a voucher if this incubator focuses on innovation. It is the most important thing where I try to convey when someone asks me, should I create my startup in Portugal? If your startup is R&D heavy and if the outcome has positive social impact, definitely yes, because the number of programs that you have is considerably large, and all of them are focused just in R&D, and most of them in social impact companies. And therefore, given that this is just a subset of the overall number of startups and companies out there, it means that your chances of getting a significant amount of funding, either as a startup or as a fund getting co-investment support and fiscal tax credits, is significantly high.
So, for example, Can you share an example how a startup can, or I don't know, a VC fund or an investor can get like 4x, 5 times X on money they're investing? So is it possible?
Yeah, okay, so what you would do is you would create a fund under the CFIT program, for instance, as an investor, a fund under the CFIT program, and then for each startup that you invest in.
And when they create this, they get how much co-financing?
It depends. It depends on a number of of items. So it's difficult to say. But what I can tell you is that you get this when you create the fund, and then in each investment that you do in startups, then you can apply for the FISH, the Social Innovation Fund, for that investment deal in particular. So this is a two-tiered approach to getting this. And because you're a CFIT fund and you invest in R&D, you still will get tax credits on this. If you are a startup, you would start with the startup voucher, no doubt. And then you would follow through, if you're doing research and development, you would follow through with IDT under Portugal 2030. Once your product is ready, then you would try to get demonstradores, which is a program just to demonstrate your new product, your product of innovation, let's say, in companies and run pilots. And then once you want to go international, then you would run for the internationalization funds, which will fund up to 70% of your expenses internationalizing. All the while, with all these do not exclude that you can apply to European funding, namely to the Horizon Europe programs, which, well, it's a different world all of its own. Grants, you can get grants only, you can get grants and equity deals, up to 2.5 million can get grant only, above that it has to be an equity deal as well. But again, once you combine these, depends a lot on your project, depends a lot on your profile, on the social impact you are not going to have, your impact in the industry and the market. But if you gather all this together, you will quickly see that at least the entire R&D component, all the way through from TRL1 to TRL9, you can get it, I wouldn't say for free, but at least a 4x leverage on your money.
Where is the line between R&D and just IT startups?
Okay, that's a very, very good question. It is very simple. It needs to push the state of the art in some way or form, and it needs to have the risk to fail. If you don't have a level of uncertainty that you can achieve that, then it's engineering. Then there's no R&D involved. For it to be R&D, you need to show that, hey, there is a state of the art, and I'm going beyond. You go and read the papers of what's coming out, you check what's in the market, and you show that you're pushing the state of the art somehow, and that there is the possibility that it won't work from a technical perspective because it's just not possible with current technology. So you need to prove these two things. If you want to get the application approved, then you also have to prove a third thing, which seems a bit counterintuitive with the ones I just said, which is you need to prove that there is the likelihood that you fail, but you need to prove that you are extremely well prepared to make it happen and not fail. But there is the possibility because you're pushing the state of the art. Here I would like also to add that when we talk about pushing the state of the art, is not necessarily from a scientific perspective, meaning that if you have a technology, for instance, that you have working very well in the lab, but no one has really tried to scale it up and bring it to market, you are still pushing the state of the art because this technology has been proven that in very controlled situations, it works decently, it produces results, but that's not necessarily the case when you put it in the field and you start bringing it to market. So in this case, you can still allege quite correctly that you are pushing the state of the art. You're proving that something that works in the lab works outside the lab. That is not necessarily the case because some technologies, work very well in the lab. In real life, they really don't make the bar. And for you to bring this technology from TRL5 which is lab approved, let's say, to TRL9, which is market approved, there's a significant number of funds that cover precisely this activity. So if you have an IT company, going specifically to that case, if you are trying to bring an implementation to market that has a high likelihood, not high, a significant likelihood of failing, because it's a new approach to a problem, although that approach has been tested in lab, that's viable. Nowadays, a lot of research projects include AI, because AI is one of those things. We can have the same context. If we have different data, different quality of data, if we're using different algorithms, we can achieve significantly different results. So if you are able to show that you're using AI, someone else has used AI, but now you're using different data spaces, different quality of data, a different algorithmic approach that can produce a different result, you still have a likelihood of failing. That makes that check. You still can show, we understand AI, so you can show that you are qualified to do it. That's another check. And you can still prove that if you make it work, and it works better than the current state of the art, you can potentially be pushing the state of the art. Check. So that's why AI research programs lately have been one of the focuses of IT companies, because they run all these checks, and this type of activities can get funding.
Can you please give examples of such not very deep tech companies, but still R&D startups from your portfolio?
Well, yes, I can give you an example of one of the companies I mentioned earlier, CO2 Offset. So what we're doing is we are taking measurements of forests using digital twins and other techniques. And then we are taking satellite imagery, and we're trying to use machine learning to create a relationship, a correlation between the measurements done at ground level and the satellite imagery that then can be extrapolated to other areas that have not been measured in the ground. So this is an example where you're using, it is a significant complexity, but it isn't, rocket surgery, as they like to call it. But I can give you other examples. For instance, a company that I've recently collaborated with, which I cannot name again for confidentiality reasons. But for instance, they had a portfolio of products aimed to the tourism sector. None of them were innovative. So they had a chatbot, they had a reservation system, and what they did is they created a project that spanned all of these projects, which used AI to try to provide an end-to-end recommendation system that would cater to a patron of an hotel or a restaurant throughout its experience, and would be recommending the experiences and the offers that would better suit them throughout the experience, communicating with a chatbot. So you have here an example, a company that did not have an innovative portfolio, and then was able, by including an innovative project that congregated these projects, to use all of this know-how and now have an innovation output at the end and be funded as they were.
If we talk about startup accelerators and incubators, do you think it is right time to start them now in Portugal? And can you also name some programs which will help to start them and finance them?
Okay, I would say that in terms of timing, it is still an interesting time to do so. There are still a lot of companies that are coming to Portugal. Initially, they were coming mostly because we had cheap human resources in Portugal, and are fairly qualified. The education system in Portugal is top-notch. So there were a bunch of companies that were coming just because it was easier to find developers and engineers and whatnot. That now has been not so much the case. It has been decreasing, that availability, as more and more companies have done that. But there have been solutions that are now being implemented. Namely, Portugal has created a number of programs that facilitate, for instance, high-tech workers from Brazil to move into Portugal. which is really compensating that shortfall of talent. And if it is implemented correctly, I expect that will again make Portugal a lot more attractive. A lot of the companies that are moving now to Portugal, they do it mostly for two reasons, therefore. One is lifestyle. Living in Portugal is nice. I don't think I need to tell you that. And a lot of people see here a place which has an entry door into Europe. It's a European standards country, so you can have a decent, not only decent lifestyle, but also access to the European market with a certain ease, while having all of the advantages of living here. And secondly, it is still a country that has high levels of funding because in terms of investment in R&D, we're still below the European average. So we still get a lot of European money invested in Portugal to support R&D funding. So these are, I would say, are the two main reasons why companies are still coming here, and I believe they will continue to do so. So Portugal is still interesting for funds because it's still interesting for startups. There's another small advantage, which is Portugal is a 10 million people market. You're not going to become rich in Portugal, but it's a great test market. The average Portuguese consumer is highly evolved. We're used to using digital tools for everything. We have fairly advanced e-government. So it's very easy for you to test with an educated audience. If your digital, especially digital products, if they work well or not, you're going to get a lot of feedback. So in that respect, I would say yes. In terms of support, there are a number of programs, namely under the PRR that I mentioned earlier, which is our recovery program, let's say, after the pandemic, that supports the creation of incubators and of technological hubs and other entities. Again, it will really depend on the structure that you create here. Although I do recommend that if you want to create something more complex, if you want to create a fund associated with an incubator or an acceleration program, you really should keep things separate and with each one of them apply to the different programs that are available. Otherwise, it becomes hard for you to justify that your investment is just focused on the activity being funded, and it just makes it harder for you to get that support. But again, it's highly dependent on how you structure things. But yes, there are a number of programs that support that. And especially, there are still a significant number of smaller cities in Portugal that are extremely receptive to hosting such incubator and acceleration programs that will provide you with resources, not only financial, but with space, with access, and whatever you need, if you bring new economic activity to their municipalities. And if you're willing to work outside Lisbon and Porto, which you should, then it's a huge boon, because now you have the support of a governmental, let's say, local government authority that is really interacting and supporting your work as well.
You mentioned a popular town near Lisbon metropolitan.
Oh yeah, a Ruda dos Vinhos. A Ruda dos Vinhos is what I'd like to call the Lisbon offshore, because it is already outside the metropolitan area of Lisbon. So if you're there, if you're incorporated there, you can already have access to literally all of the advantages of being outside the big city centers, although you're quite close to Lisbon. But nowadays, I would say you have university cities or cities close to universities that are being extremely receptive to this type of activities. Fundão, near Covilhã. Covilhã has the Universidade da Beira Interior, which is a fairly good university, and it has a city nearby which is extremely receptive. I really can't stress this enough, for companies, acceleration funds and whatnot. Leiria, Coimbra, Aveiro, Braga, Vila Real. So second layer cities, let's say, they're extremely receptive. They will support the creation of incubators, acceleration programs and whatnot. They will provide you with roadmaps. They will provide you with everything, as long as you bring that economic activity into the municipality.
Can you tell a bit more about PRR program, which you mentioned?
Well, PRR program is a huge program that of which this part of the incubators and accelerators is just a very small part. This program was created to develop several aspects of the Portuguese economy after the COVID pandemic. The incubation and the startup focus is really a very small part of it. Most of it is focused on the development of infrastructure and other things, although for a company that is wanting to develop activity in Portugal can still be interesting if they do it in coordination again with the local government entities. For instance, there's an application that finished in November or December that was for digital neighborhoods, in which the municipalities could apply to get funding for the digitization, let's say, of their local commerce and their local economic activities, usually in co-participation with IT companies or technology companies. So you'll find for companies that are not necessarily involved in pure R&D, there are still a number of programs that if you interact with local governments, local municipalities, and you check what is available in these two sites that I mentioned, you are probably going to find something there that you can reach out, and in cooperation you can create something which is interesting.
If you were about to start a startup studio and get all benefits of VC fund co-financing programs, of support of accelerations and accelerators and incubators, so how would you structure a startup studio in Portugal?
Okay, so I probably would create, first I would separate everything. So I would have an incubator, I would have the acceleration program run by and managed by a different entity, and I would have the fund as another entity. So the fund would have access to the support that I already mentioned, and you would have individual supports for both the incubator as providing infrastructure services and whatnot, and for the the acceleration program, which would be servicing the incubator, and the investment fund would be having in its investment thesis investing in the startups that span out of the acceleration program. So I'd create these entities separately.
So first, you said for incubation.
I would create an incubator.
So when ideas are validating and a team is gathering here.
Yes. So here you're creating basic infrastructure for people that have an idea and little else. Here you're having a program that helps these people, once their idea is matured, grow from here to being investable. And now you have here someone that invests and then keeps supporting the startup throughout its life cycle. So I try to cover the life cycle, the entire life cycle. I would choose again a smaller city to create this, preferably closer to a university, because it's a place where usually you have a lot of new technologies coming along and a lot of new ideas coming from students. So you can probably create a good interaction with the university. Also, when you're doing research and development, you can also support yourself, do programs in co-promotion with the university itself to get some know-how from the university into your company. And then I would use this infrastructure, and I would, in the acceleration program, I would have here a small company, which could be a partnership, or it could be my own company, that would be focused just in creating tailor-made grant support programs for the startups that are being accelerated. So if I have an innovative idea here, here in the incubator level, you're going to be addressing the vouchers and whatnot. On the acceleration level, you are going to be running for grants for R&D supported by this company that is helping these companies, because this is a very specific thing to run for these things. Usually you need help. So helping these companies and providing this service, and then you'll be having the investment fund providing the financial leverage and bringing the money.
And also probably startups which I incorporated, they also can get some co-financing. So there are four layers.
Yes. Again, the reason why I've been mentioning these programs on, let's say, a higher level is because it really is a tailor-made thing. Depending on your type of industry, depending on your R&D level, where you are, depending on where you are located, depending on even the number of doctorate professionals, that PhDs that you have working for you, depending on all this, the way you structure this, there are going to be some programs you don't have access to, others that you have. So this becomes almost an art more than a science. It's really a tailor-made program. But yes, if you are able to access all of these funds, you can really leverage your R&D money, and second, as an investor, you can really hedge your bets in terms of risk by using several tools of co-investment and fiscal benefits.
Yeah, if you look at the obstacles to structure a fund or an incubator or doing a startup studio in Portugal, what would you mention?
First, which is perhaps the biggest obstacle that Portugal has for every economic activity, we have an amazing law. Portuguese law is very good. Enforcing that law in Portugal is very, very hard. Our courts are extremely slow. It takes a lot of time for you to get the law enforced in general. Actually, Portugal has had a number of cases where the country was fined by the European Commission and by the European Court because our justice takes a long, long time. And that is an issue. For the most varied reasons, that is a big issue. The second issue we have is we are not very stable when it comes to regulatory and fiscal law. So these change often, which can lead to some insecurity, especially when you're trying to project your business in the long run. Sometimes the rules change, and you need to always keep track, you need to always be informed, but it's an additional risk that you need to consider. Finally, the biggest obstacle nowadays, which again I believe we are starting to overcome it, is the lack of human resources. In general, in Portugal, you are still going to get cheaper qualified labor than in Northern Europe, of course, so it's still advantageous, but it's really converging towards that because there's a generalized lack of qualified resources. Again, with the programs that are being implemented, and some luck, I believe that will be overcome, but I would say that is still currently an obstacle. Finally, I would say bureaucracy in general. So all of these grants are great, they're amazing, they're very interesting. They are extremely bureaucratic once actually you get the grants approved, and once the application is the easy part most of the times, and it's already most of the times complicated. The Portuguese grant application system is more complicated than European one in most instances. While you are operating the project, while you are undergoing the period of grant attribution and whatnot, it is heavy, bureaucratically speaking. I can tell you that projects that I've managed that use these grants, usually we will have a trainee or an admin person that was focused just on the paperwork, just filling up paperwork, just gathering paperwork and sending it, lobbing it at the agency. So it is bureaucratic. It's still worth it, but yes, it's a caveat. But I would say that at the moment these are the biggest challenges you have in Portugal.
So let's describe if an international founder moves to Portugal and he wants to start a company, what would be the process step by step?
All right, that's a very interesting question. So you arrive to Portugal, the first thing you need to get is your personal NIF, NIF, that's your fiscal number. You go to the finances with your passport or whatnot, you get your NIF. Based on your NIF, if you go to what we call Loja do Cidadão, which is a place that congregates several services, you can also get your digital signature, which is a must-have because with that you can take care of most things online without having to go to any specific place, including creating your company online, which will cost you about 325 euros to create, as long as you just use the templates that they have for your statutes. That happens instantly. It takes less than 1 hour to complete. There is one small caveat, which is if you want to pick the name for your company, you need to get the name approved. Usually that takes about 1 week once you submit the request, which you can also submit online. If you want to do it immediately, you can go to one of 3 registration offices you have in Portugal, which are in Lisbon, Coimbra and Porto, and there you can get your name approved immediately and create your company also immediately. Again, the entire process usually should take about 1 hour to get your company. That will give you your fiscal number, and your company will be able to operate from that moment on. Then you need to find an accountant. As you just created your company, a chartered accountant in Portugal should cost you around 150 euros per month. There's a large number of them available, very easy to find online. From that moment on, you are a company, you can invoice, you can work, you can apply for any program and whatnot. Next, you need to find a place to stay. My advice, outside Porto and Lisbon, so that you can access a larger offer of grants that are available. I would place a company preferentially close to one of the major universities in Portugal, so that would place you in Leiria, Coimbra, Aveiro, Braga, Covilhã, Vila Real and Évora. These cities are smaller cities that are close enough that it's easy for you to access not only the talent that comes out of the university, but also access to university if you want to do R&D and you want to do co-promotion projects with universities. That would be a very nice places to be. In most of these cities, you are going to find some local incubator that is either run by the university or run by the municipality, where you can get at extremely reduced prices. And here we're talking about, for instance, one instance in one university city, you would be paying for a 15 square meter room about 30 euros per month, including already electricity, internet and all that. Usually these incubators will also provide you with other services, also accountancy if you want to hire it there, and access to lawyers, access to mentoring, access to networking events, and whatnot. So now you're placed. Now you have a place to stay, you have a place to operate from. Next thing you want to do is probably want to reach out to someone that will give you support to tailor-made, as I mentioned, your access to the grant system. Most incubators have people there that are specialized in this, and they will help you for no money to literally tailor this. Although then when you make the application, if they support you in submitting the application, then probably they're going to charge you for that. But this will allow you to get an idea and start making your financial plan, already considering your potential not only tax breaks, but also grants and other sources of funding that you may have. This is important to do before you go out and get investment, because as you can imagine, it is important for an investor to feel that you are going to leverage the money they're going to get you, which probably is already leveraged by the other funds, but they want you to leverage the money they're going to invest by using and accessing these grants. So this should already be in your business plan. They should already know that you are considering these options and that you already have a plan for this. So now you start developing your project, your startup. Now it's time to get funding. Funding, unfortunately, most of the funds operate from Lisbon and Porto, so do expect to make a few trips to Lisbon and Porto to present your project. Again, if you are R&D heavy, you shouldn't have too much difficulty with that. I would also advise, if you are in specific industries, namely things like energy, healthcare, education, do reach out to the branches of the National European Agency. There are these programs, let's say, these hubs called the EITs, which is actually the institution I work for in the European Commission, that provide you with access to the network which spans entire Europe of operators. Usually these networks have all of the major players, the companies that may be interested in buying your products, also investors, also they will provide you and facilitate access to European funds. Also engaged with the national agency or the National Innovation Agency, which will also, even if you don't submit something right away, just the fact that you tell them that you are around, what you're trying to achieve, they will probably try to help you on how to access the several lines of funding that are available. So I would say that out of the bat, this is what you should be doing.
And what are taxes for startups in Portugal and for their founders?
Okay, so taxes. Corporate tax in Portugal is 25% to 28 in certain circumstances, but usually you can aim to the 25 to 28% bracket. So corporate tax on profits. We do have something which is a special case in Portugal, which we call tributação autónoma, which is there are certain classes of expenses that even if you don't have a profit, you will still pay corporate tax. Namely, restaurants and fuel for car, you'll still pay 10% of those as a tax, corporate tax, regardless if you have a profit or not.
From revenue.
Yeah. So you will still, you can get, if you are R&D heavy, you can get some rebate on your tax expenses because all R&D activities are entirely rebatable in corporate tax. So you can get a significant rebate on corporate tax that you can use over a period of 5 years. From that moment on, that's the main tax that you're going to be paying until you start invoicing. Then you have VAT, which in Portugal is 23%.
Invoicing for local or abroad companies?
No, for local. For local. If you invoice inside the European Union or with countries that have double tributation agreements, which are, let's say, the most economic relevant countries in the world, then you will not pay any VAT on those. In terms of corporate taxes, this is it. In terms of revenue taxes, what you need to consider for your employees. So you have 3 components that you need to consider. One is the IRS, which is the revenue tax, which depends on how much you earn. There are several
income tax for an employee.
For an employee, yes. There is Social Security that you will have to pay, the company will have to pay separate from what the employee pays. So the company will pay 11%, the remainder is from the employee's wage. And you have something which is called the Social Security Compensation Fund, which is next to nothing. It's like 1 or 2 euros per month. That will not be what's going to set you back. This is, of course, important because you're going to be hiring and you need to consider that the taxes.
So how much, if we can just to take some average percentage of salary?
Well, it depends. If you are working minimum wage, you will not pay any IRS. You'll just be paying Social Security, and your taxes are going to be quite low. If you are above the 2K gross income per month, oh, by the way, in Portugal we pay 14 months, so we consider that you have a subsidy for Christmas and for vacation. If your gross monthly income is over 2K, I would say you should put aside, consider 35 to 40% on tax on that value.
On that goes?
Yes, on that value, on average. What this affords you, well, education is almost free, hospitals are almost free, and well, it pays you for the remaining of things. But these are the main taxes that you should consider.
And if you get dividends, I know that it is
25%. Same as
25 or 28? I thought that it's
it depends. It depends on the type of company. 25 to 28. See, all of the revenues is between 25 and 28 bracket, and it depends on the type of revenue that you have.
So for startups it is the same, but if a startup is funded, so they don't pay taxes on profits and don't distribute dividends, so they are, until they are sold, or
they are not paying. They will not be paying any taxes except on expenses they present on gasoline and lunches and dinners.
So on expenses, gasoline and food.
Yes.
Okay.
So for those in specifically, they'll be paying 10% of those in taxes, regardless of having or not a profit. If you're not earning a
It
profit,
is taxes on your costs.
yes, yes. So it is a very specific situation that we have in Portugal, but that's the only thing that you're going to be paying.
And what are types of companies or structuring of startups in Portugal?
Well, basically, you have a limited liability company, which can be either
LDA in
LDA,
Portugal.
which can be limitada, which can be single person, which is in unipessoal, or can be, if you have more shareholders, just a normal limited liability company, limitada. This one you can create with a social capital, initial capital of 100 euros. Again, it costs you about 325 euros, and all of the shareholders are, in the statutes, and the transmission is harder, let's say, the transmission of equity. If you want to create a corporation, what is called a sociedade anónima, then you need a minimum of 50K of social capital, and on top of having a chartered accountant, you'll also need to have an accounts reviewer, which will cost you about 1,800, maximum 2K per year, until you have like a larger dimension. But then you're going to have, let's say, the corporate structures in place, the board of directors, and the structures of a corporation.
But most of companies, the LDA,
LDA,
even
LDA.
what is, for example, the Series A? Is it possible with LDA?
It is possible. Most investment funds will require you that upon receiving investment, you will transform into a sociedade anónima.
So into a company where 500,000...
50,000 euros of social capital.
500 or 50,000?
50K.
Okay.
That's usually the rule, I would say. Series A, definitely. Most of the time, seed investment, they will already require you to transform your limited liability company into a sociedade anónima.
Do you think that 2023 is a window of opportunities for VC funds?
Definitely, yes, but I would say even more for startups. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a number of funds that are being created now under the CFID, and a number of funds that are searching for leverage with the Social Innovation Fund. And the thing is, a lot of money is coming in to the country, and there's only so many R&D heavy companies we have here. So a company that is R&D heavy right now has significant diversity in sources of funding, in funds that may be interested in investing in what they're doing. So I would say that for startups, R&D heavy startups, definitely. For funds, although at the moment there is significant competition for these startups that are R&D heavy, what I predict, and we are already witnessing that, is that you're starting to have a number of startups that are migrating even from the UK, because they are seeing Portugal as a very interesting destination, not only to operate but also to acquire funding.
So, David, now 2023 is a good time to start a new startup in Portugal, especially if it is an R&D startup.
Definitely.
So let's speak about advantages for startups here in Portugal. Good weather, a lot of sun.
Good food,
may be
amazing people.
Yes, it may be an advantage or a disadvantage, because when you are, I don't know, in Singapore and the skyscrapers motivating you to to run and do business. Yeah. So what do you think is good here in Portugal?
First of all, it really depends on the type of startup that you're creating. Looking at industries, there are certain industries that in Portugal are going to be obviously more interesting. Anything related to the blue economy, to ocean economy. Portugal has one of the largest economic areas, ocean economic areas in the world, because of a new UN agreement. So anything related to the ocean, for instance, definitely Portugal. Energy related to ocean, definitely Portugal. Solar, for instance, solar energy, definitely Portugal.
Impact startups? different types of
yeah.
impact startups?
Any impact startup, especially if it has a large component of R&D, definitely Portugal, because there are currently a very large number of funds that, due to the having accessed leveraging and co-investment from European and Portuguese programs, they must invest in companies that are R&D heavy. And given that there is a limited supply of companies that check all these boxes, then it's natural that you have over demand and not enough supply. It is much easier for a startup under those conditions to get funding in Portugal. There are, of course, other advantages. I would say that still the average cost of setting up business here is lower, especially than Northern Europe, while having the advantage of being inside the European Economic Zone and part of Schengen space and part of the Eurozone, and pretty much we're inside all of the economically relevant zones in the world. Also, we have very close connection with the US and with South America through Brazil. A number of the agreements that we have, both to bring talent from Brazil, which helps supply Portugal with that talent, but also it becomes a lot easier to set up shop there because there are trade agreements and the language barrier is much lower. They also speak Portuguese, albeit a slightly different type. New York is 5 hours away by plane, direct flights. So there are a number of geographic advantages just by the fact that you are in Portugal. And also because the process in bureaucratic terms of operating a startup, if you exclude the running of grants, which is extremely bureaucratic, as I mentioned earlier, the normal operation of a startup is relatively simple and non-bureaucratic in Portugal. So you can really, in the early stages, bring those operational costs down, test your idea. Funding is available. If you're R&D heavy, there's a large number of funds and grants and other things you can access. Portugal is a small country, so it's very easy for you to reach out to university, talk to the dean, talk to the mayors, talk to the ministers sometimes. Everything is quite accessible, and that makes out for a fairly welcoming, let's say, environment for a startup. Also, if you're testing new products, Portugal is an excellent test market because, again, we have a relatively small population, 10 million. It's a large city, but it's a population that is very much used to using digital services. It is, in terms of a consumer profile, it is Western profile. So you can really test here, see if your product works. If it doesn't work, your exposure in terms of image is not that damaging. So it's a good place for you to test your concepts and to try out new things.
English proficiency level is also one of the benefits, yes, because a lot of people speak English. Do you think that non-Portuguese speaking person could create startups here?
Oh, they do all the time. It's extremely simple. For some time now that you start learning English since elementary school. So I would say the generation that is up to 35 has started learning English fairly early in their school curricula. The ones that haven't are still able to manage. So you won't find any difficulty in moving around Portugal, doing business in Portugal in English. And actually a lot of companies, my companies for instance, the official working language, the documentation language is English, because we always have foreign nationals that are working with us. If we need to work with partners that are international, there's always this thing of having to translate. We just work in English. Everyone's comfortable with that. You know, the vocabulary may not be perfect at all times, but it's more than enough to operate and to work with without any major problems.
So we discussed that there are a lot of opportunities for VC funds here to be co-funded. And so, like, I understood that maybe there would be more money than startups for them, and it is a good time to get finance from these VC funds.
Yes, definitely.
So what programs are supporting startups?
Okay, so perhaps we can look at the life cycle, let's say, of a startup, and we go through the funds. We can start when the startup is created. You can get a voucher, a startup voucher that will fund the most normal activities of a startup, especially if you're developing a new product, which we assume you are, which will give you about 30K of free money. Then once you start developing your product and you start entering the R&D stages, you can apply for an IDT, which will pay up to 70% of all your R&D expenses, direct and indirect. So this includes things like office space, electricity, you know, the time of other people involved with the people in R&D. So if
What is the maximum amount?
70%, I have no idea. It's 1 million something. It's around that. Most funded projects, I would say, what is given is about 500, 600K. That would be the average, I'd say. Then you have all of your activities are also liable to be included in a tax rebate, corporate tax rebate, in which 100% of your R&D expenses can be removed at the tax rate of 25 to 28% from your corporate tax. So that's an extra cut that you have. Then when you start doing the demonstration and the pilots in your target customers, you can get specific funding for that, which again can go up to 70%. And for your internationalization expenses can go up, I think right now it's 65%. When you try to internationalize, presence in fairs, marketing materials and whatnot, you can still apply to any of the Horizon Europe programs without entering the double funding issue. So you can still go to Horizon Europe and other sources of funding. Plus, usually on a local level, you are going to find that municipalities and whatnot, especially in earlier stage startups, they have a number of programs that finance and support startups. Also, you will find that by industry, depending on your industry, there are a number of programs that will support and fund earlier stage startups. So it is something that has to be tailor-made for each startup, depending on industry, level of R&D, and your plan. But I would say that a very, very significant part, and here we're talking 60, 70, 80% of your product development expenses and even operational expenses around taking the technology to market will be potentially covered by these programs.
How much money startups in Portugal usually get for pre-seed stage, seed stage, and then Series A? What evaluations? Can you share some benchmarks?
Well, some benchmarks. I would say you are looking to 150 to 300K for pre-seed. To seed, you're looking from 500 to 1.5 million, and then Series A above that. The valuations will really very much depend with the industry and if you are already in the market or not. But just to give you a benchmark of an investment deal that I closed earlier, this was a company pre-market. Our valuation was 6.4 million. 6.4 million pre-market and
R&D company.
R&D company, yeah. So we got 1 million funding for that company without any major issues. It was quite a straightforward process. These are of course, it's highly variable depending on industry. For instance, in the life sciences, usually the tickets tend to be higher because there are more regulatory issues, so it's expected that the tickets are higher. On the other hand, the maturity of your project has a larger impact on the overall valuation. So it's really very dependent.
If you were about to start a startup aimed to global markets, do you think it's better to do it in Delaware, the United States, or in Portugal?
Well, That's a very, very interesting question. I think that you should create a startup in Portugal due to the amount of funding that you are going to be getting. What you can consider if you want to structure your company differently is you may want to create a parent company in Delaware, but then have the operations in a startup in Portugal, and then have ownership through Delaware. But that's probably something that you should talk with a fiscal lawyer, let's say, to figure that one out. But in terms of operating, creating your startup and operating, I would say that Portugal at the moment is more interesting. It's the reason why I create most of mine in Portugal and not in the US.
Mm-hmm. And what are trends on startup market? So what are the main spheres where people come to Portugal with their startups? I don't know.
Yeah.
Crypto, what else? AI?
There's, well, I would say one, blue economy, we're getting huge influx, so everything ocean related for obvious reasons. Geographically, we're a great place for you to test and to scale your blue economy. A lot of interest lately in energy, in the energy field. Portugal has a huge solar potential, huge wind potential, so a huge tides and wave energy harvesting potential. So a lot of energy startups also have been coming in. But curiously, also a lot of startups around healthcare and services to individuals. In terms of AI, we have some very interesting cases like Fidzai, for instance. It's a very interesting case. Unicorn.
One of 7 unicorns
Exactly.
of Portugal.
Yeah, which for a country of 10 million is not fifth position worldwide in terms of unicorns per capita. But we do have some intensive AI intensive companies in Portugal. I would claim that Farfetch is also an AI intensive company. But these companies usually they use AI as a tool, so they're not fundamentally focused on the AI. AI is a tool as part of a business model. There are some deep tech companies that are appearing now in Portugal. It has been a growing trend, but I would say that compared to, for instance, healthcare, it's still not as significant.
So what are obstacles in Portugal to start a company here for founders?
Well, I would start with one of the obstacles which I mentioned earlier as an advantage. So on one hand, we do have 10 million people, which is a good test market. It is definitely not a market to scale. So your focus, if you are in Portugal, should not be that you're going to be doing your business long-term in Portugal. This is a place to start. This is a place perhaps to run your R&D and part of your operations, but commercially, it is just a stepping stone. You really need to look abroad because you will not find the scale and the money in Portugal. That's just the way it is. Another difficulty that people often find is recently there has been a reduction in the number of available qualified human resources. Not as dramatic as Northern Europe, but it has been felt, which has been slightly increasing the prices of qualified resources, which now is being offset by getting people from Brazil, which have been coming in droves. So that situation will probably stabilize and it will improve. The biggest limitation, which is also the one that affects investment funds, is our legal system. It is very, very hard if you have to go to court to get paid to solve an issue. It will take forever. You can really not rely in the Portuguese court system to apply the laws. The law system is actually good. The implementation of the law and the enforcement of the law, it is time consuming, money consuming. It is quite complicated. It has the slight advantage perhaps that makes us a society which is not very litigant like the US. So people will not sue you just because their expectation of getting something out of it in useful time is not. So sometimes it can be beneficial. No one will sue you because they tripped and fell on your store, let's say. But yes, if you are a company that expects to have to access the courts to solve issues on a frequent basis, that's a huge problem. And many companies that I know, what they do is they actually have a parent company or they have a subsidiary in the UK or in the Netherlands, and they just do business through there so that they can handle any disputes with local court systems instead of recurring to Portuguese court systems. I would say that these are the major issues. Our fiscality is not amazing. Our taxes are not extremely low. But they're bearable. At least in the scale-up phase, probably that will mean that you may want to move to somewhere where it's fiscally more efficient. But I would say in the startup phase, that's really not a barrier.
What are salaries in Portugal for startups, for example? I don't know, for software engineers, for designers, and so on.
Well, it depends on proficiency and level of experience, of course. You can get in Portugal a very decent programmer, I mean someone who has 10 years experience, that you're going to be paying them 2 to 2.2 thousand net per month. That will be costing you 3.3k gross per month. That is very, I mean, standard full stack programmer, 10 years experience. So if you go to AI, for instance, data science, then wages can increase. But again, when you compare this with what you're going to be paying in the Netherlands, in Germany, or in the UK, it's still quite interesting. So I would say, I mean, an admin you're going to be getting for 900, 1,000 net, a good admin person. I don't know, a commercial profile, you're going to be paying them 1,500, 1,800 net plus commissions. So yeah, I would say that your average probably is 2k net, which means on average 3.23k gross per month.
Thank you, David. Nice
You're welcome.
talk.
It was a pleasure having had this conversation. I hope that it was enlightening.
I hope that the people who are striving to start a company here in Portugal, and maybe some investors who are considering Portugal to start a VC fund or an accelerator, will find this talk very helpful for them.
I also hope so, and if they do decide to do that, welcome to Portugal.
Max Pog builds a startup studio.